Hi, and welcome to Freedom Rocs. I have here Joe Meleca-Voigt of Marriage Equality New York.
Hi. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad you could make it. Glad you could make it.
Thanks, Chris.
I guess to start out, what is Marriage Equality New York, and what are you trying to do?
Marriage Equality New York is a statewide organization that is trying to get marriage passed in New York State, which includes same-sex couples. Or as I like to say, includes consenting adult couples regardless of their gender.
And I guess you've been lobbying in Albany pretty heavily, or I've heard that. Do you think that it has a chance this year of making it into law?
I would hope so. I really would hope so. The state is changing. The dynamics are changing. You know, we were very disappointed to see that it did not pass the Senate the last time it went to vote, but it has passed the New York State Assembly 3 times. So we do know there's support for it in legislators. Do support it because they understand that New York State supports it. As a matter of fact, just at today, a few hours ago, on the day of this recording, a Siena poll came out stating that 58% of New Yorkers support the passage of marriage for same-sex couples in New York State and making that legal. So I think as long as our senators are listening to their constituents, then yes, it has a great chance of passing.
Cool, yeah. Actually, I have a copy of the poll right here. Okay. And what I thought was interesting is that not only that Republicans are pretty much evenly divided, right, but that independents are actually more strongly in favor of marriage equality than Democrats. And if you look at a lot of the polls that have been coming out lately, you know, a lot of them on fiscal issues, the independents tend to line up with the Republicans, but in this case, on this issue, the independents are lining up with the Democrats. So it does seem to be that there's a shift of public opinion going on.
There's certainly a shift in public opinion, and I think what is wonderful about independents, and what's, let me backtrack. The number, I believe it says independents and other non-party affiliated. So we're talking people who would be in the Libertarian Party, independents, all various party registrations that don't fall under Republican or Democrat. So I would think for people who consider themselves truly independent, it would probably be even higher than what you're seeing in there, to be honest. And to me, that independent voter, the person who's the independent constituent, however you want to call that, who's in the middle, is looking at things from a point of view of what's right, what works, what makes sense. You know, one of the things that's been really great in the gay community, or I'll refer to it as the LGBT community, which includes lesbians, gays, transgender, bisexual people. It puts us all into a quick way of saying it rather than saying all of those groups.
Right.
But one of the interesting things is that the everyday people in the middle, I don't think it's as much of an issue as it used to be, because we've really become more open about who we are. There have been legislation and laws passed, the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation for housing and employment, that have been passed in New York State, that have really allowed us to be who we are in terms of LGBT people. And so I think that as we live more openly and honestly and our everyday lives, and people see that, they realize it's not really a threat. And I think people who may have an issue with it don't get the non-threatening nature of this, that no one wants to influence anybody else's marriage. We just want to have our own equality when it comes to this. So I think people are seeing the sensibility of it. I think people, whether it's in the middle, whether it's on either end of the spectrum, people are people. And when you know somebody every day who you work with or in your family who is gay or lesbian, and they have a loving partner, and they take care of each other, and they want to provide for each other, and they want to solidify that through marriage, it becomes less threatening. And so I think it is interesting what you're saying, but I also think it's not surprising to me.
You know, it's interesting that you mention transgendered people, because I had just heard a couple of weeks ago about New York City and how it issues marriage licenses.
Okay.
No, not marriage licenses. I'm sorry, birth certificates.
Oh, okay.
It's interesting because there are people, transgendered people, who want to get their gender changed on their birth certificate, from male to female, female to male. And in New York City, they require you to have a specific kind of operation before they will change that. I'm not sure if you were aware of this.
Well, I certainly support my transgender brothers and sisters and people who, and I'm not biological, but people who are my friends in that sense. I would never consider myself an authority on the issue. I would say, however, though, that again, it's that same idea as people are living more openly and honestly about who they are, we're realizing that gender and sex are two different things. So sometimes what people believe themselves to be or how they feel is not the same as what their body displays. And so personally asking someone to have had some specific surgery or operation in order to change their birth certificate seems to me like you're not trusting someone with what they claim their gender to be. So again, I don't claim to be an authority on that issue, but if that is the case, I certainly think that we need to be more respectful of what how people view themselves and what people how they want to express themselves. As long as it's not hurting anyone else, we should be able to support that in adults. So, I'm not familiar. I'm going to look into it more.
Yeah. Apparently, I mean, some people can't have the operation for medical reasons, and
or so, financial, or for whatever, or maybe they don't want to have an operation. I mean, perhaps they're, it's a very dynamic situation, and that individuals have different views of why they consider themselves transgender, and we as a society look at gender as being the way we manifest ourselves physically, and so it's not always that way. And so I think that's proof. A surgery is almost like, well, you have to manifest yourself physically the way you feel mentally. And I not being a transgender person, I can't really speak beyond that. And if you'd like to do a show about it, I know several people who'd probably want to talk to you about it.
Well, we might. Okay. We might. Yeah, it just occurred to me that we might find ourselves in a situation where gay people can get married, but they want to be a bride, and the state insists on calling them a groom.
Absolutely.
Like
well, when you look at it that way, and that's why I always go back to me, marriage should be a union between consenting adults. And let's just leave gender out of it altogether. Let's take that out of it, because we are talking about adults who want to provide for the person they love, and they want to provide for their family unit, whatever that might be. And so if we take that gender piece out of it altogether, we take out the piece about anything that could be construed as other than consenting adults, I think it makes it for a fairer situation.
Like 3 seconds.
Okay.
So we'll be back right after this message.
Did you know high-quality versions of all episodes of Freedom Rocs are available on DVD? Each DVD contains 3 episodes for just $15. We also have specials that aren't on RCTV or YouTube. You can find links to all of our DVDs on the Freedom Rocs website, freedomrocs.cybermansoftware.com.
Hi, and welcome back to Freedom Rocs. As always, we don't get Nielsen ratings, so if you like the show, go to the website that's now appearing on the bottom of your screen and let us know what you think. So I'm back with Joe Meleca-Voigt of Marriage Equality New York. And I guess for this segment, let's talk about the difference between marriage as a religious concept and marriage as a civil institution.
One of my favorite topics.
Go ahead.
Because I think that, and thank you, I think that topic can be confusing for a lot of people. A lot of times when people get married, we're not looking at that there are actually separate institutions, because we don't see ourselves as having separate relationships. In that, marriages, civil marriage, which is what Marriage Equality New York is advocating for same-sex couples, civil marriage is the only type of marriage that is recognized in the state. In order for someone to be legally married, recognized marriage, the state, it has to be registered in, the town hall, or there has to be a civil ceremony. There has to be some civil documentation. There has to be a civil side to the marriage. There doesn't have to be a religious side to a marriage. The religious definitions and confines and constraints of marriage are defined by one's own religion and the religious institution. And so if, let's say, and a lot of people get confused, they say, well, you know, if a church doesn't want to marry same-sex couples, they shouldn't have to. Well, they wouldn't have to. Just as currently a church or religious institution wouldn't have to marry a couple that they didn't deem fit to be married. I mean, someone were going through, a couple were going through marriage counseling, and the pastor or minister said, you know, I just don't think you're ready. Or there are certain religions that don't marry people once they've been divorced. They also have to go through an annulment process. And so that divorce process is seen as the legal civil piece of it, and the annulment is the religious divorce, so to speak. And if a church chooses not to marry a couple because one has been married in a church and divorced and not annulled, they can choose to not allow that couple to marry, or to not marry that couple, not rather. So we're talking about the same thing. If a church or a religious institution is not comfortable marrying same-sex couples for whatever reason, no one's asking them to. They don't have to. Interestingly, there's a lot of growing support for same-sex marriage nationwide and in New York State specifically. In that poll we referred to earlier, 59% of Catholics who were polled support it. And nationwide, in an ABC poll that was done several weeks ago, or at least released several weeks ago, the biggest growth in acceptance of same-sex marriage was in Catholics. So as an institution that is understanding, as a people at least that go to the institution understanding that no one wants to change what their church is saying or is doing or whatever. But there's growing support for marriage equality among same-sex couples in faith communities. And when you look at some of these faith communities that do want to be able to marry loving, consenting adult couples that are of the same gender, it's almost like their religious rights are being infringed on, because they're not able to make a determination that this is a consenting adult that we think, you know, we want to bless and give this gift of marriage to and have this ceremony and such. So I think that if we need to really separate civil marriage from religious marriage. We need to really look at what are we talking about when it comes to the state and the state legalizing marriage. And we're strictly talking about, and states do, nationwide, marriage is something that is a state's rights issue. States do grant marriage in terms of the governing body over it. And so if we look at New York State, and that's not to say that I don't think it should be legalized nationwide, but if we look at the state, and what we're asking, we don't want churches to change anything unless they want to. If someone goes to a church that doesn't support marriage for same-sex couples, and they do personally, that's an individual choice as to how they want to handle that within their own church, whether they want to pursue changing their church, changing within their church, accepting it and staying there. I mean, that's all individual, and that's religious freedom that we have in this country. So. Now,
it's on the states' rights issue. I'm assuming you're familiar with the Defense of Marriage Act on the federal level. And you know, one of the reasons that it was passed is because of the full faith and credit clause, which would require one state to recognize the marriages in another state.
Correct.
And I'm not sure what the answer is, but it sounds like it could be a tricky issue if on the one hand you want it to be a states' rights issue, and then on the other hand.
Well, and that's why I wanted to rephrase. I'm not saying that I think it needs to be a states' rights issue in terms of that. I think it's a states' rights issue because states grant marriages. And then when you talk about the Defense of Marriage Act, we're taking one section of rights for one section of adults and saying, look, we're going to have this clause, the comity clause, that, you know, things that allow different states to recognize other states' marriages, and we're only going to exclude it for this group of people. To me, that's wrong, and I don't think it's mutually exclusive of each other. If I was married in Canada and to a woman 5.5 years ago, and in New York State, I mean, this is the crazy part about this. New York State recognizes my marriage from Canada to another woman, but they won't grant a marriage to women. So basically, and this is getting off your topic a little bit, but basically we can go elsewhere and spend the money and, you know, do everything to get married, and then we come back here and it's recognized, but we can't actually have the marriage here. And I think the Defense of Marriage Act precludes people from living equally from state to state.
Okay. I guess as long as we're on the subject of the poll, or at least we mentioned it, I wanted to let's see. It is interesting that that support is actually higher among Catholics than Jewish people and Protestants. But I think what's most interesting is that the support among young people, like 18 to 34, is, I mean, it's pretty much overwhelming. I mean, it's 74% support and 22% oppose. And I also, I'm also aware that the polls have shown that young people are generally tend to be more libertarian or conservative. And I think, there may be some connection here in terms of the growing amount of support across the political spectrum. And we only have 30 seconds left, so we'll get to this in the next segment.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, but I just thought that was interesting.
I would be happy to discuss that, because there's another interesting data is that the higher someone's economic salary is and their income, the higher the support is as well. And I think those two things are related in some ways.
All right. Well, as I said, we have about now 15 seconds left. So please stick around. We'll be back with the third segment of this interview after this public service announcement.
Did you know Freedom Rocs has swag? You can help stimulate the economy and show how much you like Freedom Rocs at the same time. We've got t-shirts for men and women. We've got coffee mugs and beer steins. We've got food and beverage thermoses. You can get your own Freedom Rocs swag with the show logo, as seen in the opening title of the show, right here at our Cafe Press shop. That's cafepress.com/freedomrocs.
Hi, welcome back to Freedom Rocs. If you're just joining us, my guest is Joe Meleca-Voigt of Marriage Equality New York. And right before the break, we were talking about some of the demographic trends in this recent poll about same-sex marriage. And young people, people are pretty much evenly divided, even on the, say, with example for age 55 plus, it's about 45%, 46%. Whereas young people, it's basically, three-quarters, 74% support, 22% oppose, and very similar, 73% and 23% for higher income people. Right. And I think you were saying that you had drawn some conclusions based on that.
Well, and again, this is new data to everyone, so I think it's important to point out as well that 58% overall support New York State legalizing marriage for same-sex couples. A very interesting number to me is the 58% support and 38% opposed is exact numbers for what they call upstate New York. And so what's interesting to me is that I think a lot of people look at these numbers and they think, well, New York City drives it and stuff, and it's actually only 54% New York City. So, I think what's a great testament to upstate New York, which I don't know what lines they're using for upstate, is that we really are a good reflection of all of New York put together. When you look at the younger, I think it goes back to my original point, Chris, that the more open and honest gay and lesbian people are in their everyday life and their living, and people realizing the non-threat that we really are, that there's more acceptance. And I think that with the internet, with television, with increased understanding, younger generations are more exposed to your average everyday gay people. It always surprises me. People think that who knows, these strange, weird relationships. We feed our cats. We get up, we feed the cats, we go to work, we come home, we put out the garbage. I mean, there really isn't this big, exciting life. It's what everybody wants to do is have safety and security for their families. I think as generations grow up and more people are living openly, that acceptance grows. And I think a lot of it comes with that. I think a lot of it comes with education as well. When we learn about various civil rights movements throughout history, the women's suffrage movement, and various things that have happened throughout history, we always get to a point where we look back and we say, wow, people really had to fight for that? I mean, it really wasn't just obvious that women should be able to vote. It really wasn't just obvious that blacks and whites are equal. I mean, it just wasn't obvious. And it isn't at that time. And those things are generational as we learn to accept each other despite our differences. So I think that has a lot to do with it. I think with the economic piece, I think that also has to do with the broader range of exposures. And in terms of perhaps people who are in a higher economic class, and I say economic strictly, understand some of the implications and for financial implications for this. That you have someone like myself who I work, I pay my taxes. I have no choice in paying my taxes. They come right out of my paycheck before I ever take it home. I pay Social Security. In many cases, I pay higher taxes because I am not able to file married. New York has this weird clause that you have to file in New York the same way you file federally. And since the federal government doesn't recognize same-sex marriages, I'm forced to lie on my income tax return and say I'm not married. And so, in essence, for some people, that could mean a higher tax rate. So in some cases, we pay even more taxes, pay into Social Security, and if something were to happen to me, my spouse wouldn't get my Social Security. And so for me, I think people perhaps in a higher economic bracket who are looking more at rather than, you know, I need my paycheck to get through the week, are looking at things and saying, wow, this doesn't make economic sense. It doesn't make economic sense that if I want to protect the person that I love, that I can't for whatever reason. That if I want to put my spouse on my health insurance as I am on my partner's health insurance, my spouse's insurance comes out of her paycheck pre-tax, and mine comes out post-tax, simply because we're not, for our federal taxes that is, we're not recognized as a married couple federally. So I think that there are so many implications to it that the more people realize and the more they find out insidious situations of people not being able to be there when their loved one is dying because they're not recognized as a legal spouse, things like that, you know, there are between federal and state rights, there are over 3,000 rights that someone gets by getting married. You walk down the aisle because you love someone, you want to commit your life to them. You don't think about those rights until you need them. And so we have these 3,000 rights that come automatically with marriage, be they federal or state. And I think that as people start to see the stories of how each of those rights are impacting people differently, and that's what I mean by the education piece and the exposure to what's happening, because it's just not right. It's not right to treat our fellow citizens this way and to deny someone rights simply because of who they love, which should be a celebrated thing. You know, we don't have enough love in this world. We need to celebrate what we do have.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that, and of course, you know, we don't have a lot of divorce statistics for same-sex couples yet, but it does seem from the data that is available, that they tend to form a lot more committed relationships than heterosexual couples. I would say that's a little bit misleading, only because I don't think same-sex relationships are all that different than opposite-sex relationships. I think what happens is I know several couples who've been together 10, 15, 20, 25 years, same-sex couples who want to get married and are unable to. And when a state or a country does pass same-sex marriage, you've got people who've been in a relationship for a really long time getting married. So I think you have a disproportionate number of people who have been in longer-term relationships that have already set their path for spending their lives together, who are getting married, and I think your chances of divorce lessen. I would contest that as time went on and we got to that wonderful place where we said, I can't believe people actually thought same-sex couples shouldn't marry. I think that when we get to that place, and it's not something people have been waiting for and waiting for and waiting for, I think we'll find a more even keel in that. I really like to believe we're not all that different. So. Yeah. Well, it's we're almost out of time, and so it's been a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm glad you could be on our show. Great. Thank you for inviting me. It's our pleasure. So that's it for this episode of Freedom Rocks. As always, we would enjoy your feedback. You can go to the website at the bottom of the screen and let us know you're watching and let us know what you think and what you'd like to see on the show.